Hello and welcome back to Books in the Biz. Trying this for the second go around. Rich, how are you doing?
I'm good, Dan. How are you?
I'd be much better if my technology was balanced, because that's going to be our subject today. Balance.
There's a good lead in.
That is a good lead in because apparently technology's taken its own Thanksgiving vacation, and I think it ate too much turkey, suffering the tryptophan effect. Anyway, here we are again on this lovely day, and I'm just going to since I forget to say these things, I'm going to put this on a scroll down below. Uh,
Oh, look at that.
just look at that. We're fancy here. So if you're not watching this, if you're listening to this, we do ask that you please like, share, and subscribe. Whether you're seeing us on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, or wherever we're at. You can also visit us at booksinbiz.com. But let's get that out of the way, our shameless self promotion. So, Rich, what is it about balance that we need to work on? We were talking about this the other day, and you came up with a pretty good idea as far as discussion. So, what was your thought on balance?
Well, I think I like to come up with a single word that's sort of the theme for the coming up year. And I've been thinking about 2025 at this point because we're so close to the end of 2024 that I figured, well, what's my word going to be for 2025? Balance was the word because every time I turned around, it felt like I was talking about, we need balance, or we need to put balance into that comment, or we need to put that as a common denominator of what we're talking about. And it doesn't necessarily matter. We probably could sit here for 3 hours and talk about, where balance fits in different pieces. But I think the big one that I'm seeing is, um, people are kind of focused on, I need one person. I need somebody to come in and they're going to cost me this much money and they're going to do practically everything. That's not balanced. That's the old school world of people need to have their ankles chained to a desk for 40 hours and then I know I got my value. Well, no, you don't know you got your value, and it probably isn't correct in the way that new things are happening here, in the way that the world is working, the way that office life is working. You know, you might be surprised to find out that I'd probably recommend that you have more than one person, but they be fractional. That you actually work with somebody who's going to work for a certain amount of time, but they're going to have expertise to be able to do a certain task, as opposed to I'm going to chain this person to the desk and then they're going to learn everything they need to know, and that's going to be my only person who's going to have to be my go-to.
I think that's a great idea. I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate here. I think it's, with this challenge, of course, we do a lot of fractional stuff. You're also dealing with workplace culture. And as you and I know, it is hard to develop culture when nobody's in the office or
Mhm.
when they're not in there on a regular basis. So you have to find ways to again create that balance. Um, as I was thinking about this over the past week from when we first discussed this topic, it's like you've got to really get to a point where you have an internal team that is being developed to fill those roles. And we're all seeing it now where large corporations are saying, look, you're not going to work at home anymore. You got to come back into the office. Now, I think that's done for a couple of reasons. One, they see the impact that not having people working together collaboratively in person as a team is doing to their sales and their bottom line. I also think the other side of it is that's a very good way to weed out people without doing a major layoff is say, hey, you got to come back to the office. And I know, for example, a colleague of mine who moved from where he was working back to Wisconsin, uh, and he says, I'm not going back there. So guess what? He took the severance and he left.
Mhm.
Uh, but we still got to get people in working together collaboratively. And I think, where the fractional side of it, where I see that helping, is you're taking somebody who's been there, done that, who's had that experience, who can bring in a wealth of knowledge, but what they should be doing is transferring that knowledge.
Mhm.
So to kind of append your fractional work, I think too many companies look at fractional and say, like you said, this person's going to come in, they're going to do all this stuff, and that's going to be it. But there has to be a transference of knowledge. Otherwise, that fractional person really didn't do their job and didn't function in the way that they should have which is building up the internal workforce to eventually replace them.
Yeah.
And most fractional positions aren't designed to be lifelong positions. They might last a couple, we'll say they were between 2 to 5 years at max, and some of them might only last a couple weeks or a couple months. You know that for a fact. You're brought in to sometimes work on just getting the book straight and getting the financials in line, and then you're done, hands off, away
Yeah.
you
Hands
go.
off.
um, but I think we are going to see more and more just due to the workforce
Mhm.
being smaller. There's fewer people, fewer experienced people filling certain positions. So we're going to have to utilize the knowledge of somebody who maybe doesn't want to work full time anymore, or maybe has chosen to step out of the workforce, but for whatever reason, still feels they have something left to give, or they want to occupy their time. So that's going to be, I think, where we're going to see some of this balance coming in at.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a little bit of, every story is going to be unique. Okay? But I think the culture thing is something that I definitely agree with. That I think that you have to find a way, because of the declining workforce, you can't expect that everything's going to go back to this is the way it was before and this is the way it's going to be now because I decided. Okay. You can decide all you want, but the market's going to dictate, the fact that you're going to have to find creative ways to do things. So I'm not saying that everybody has to be remote fractional. You know, if you want somebody to come in a few days a week to do a certain thing, then, that can be your creativity, how you're going to find a fractional person to fill a role. Okay. I have a couple examples lately where it just became, we need a CFO. Okay, why do you need a CFO? Because we need a CFO. Okay, so you go in and you find out that there's no team. There's nobody who specifically has either the accounting side or the financial planning side of what the CFO's office has become, at least from a standpoint of a day-to-day operation, inclusion. Um, so now it becomes, well, what's the ramification here? You know, they hired one person and expected that one person to be able to do everything, all the way from bookkeeping up to being the CFO. And when you do that, even for the short period, you're not going to get everything. You
Right.
just can't. There's not enough time in the day. So, had you said, we need to cover this piece of the pie, we need to understand that these are the 9 or 10 different tasks that we have to actually work on, you know, then you could say, well, who can do those tasks? Is it somebody who's already in the operation? Is it somebody that you have to bring in? Can you bring in someone with an expertise who can do cash flow forecast because the old owner didn't do it at all? He just looked at what's my cash balance. Okay, I'm good to go. That's it. No forecasting, no expecting how am I going to do 13 weeks from now? Do I have to borrow? Do I have to cover? Because he didn't have anything that you now have as the new owner. So, how do you want to fill the role and what are you expecting people to do in that new role? So, that's where I think, again, balance comes in because had you looked at the task list before you hired the CFO and said, oh, I can get two controller type people, or I can get two people at a little bit lower level, or someone who's an expert on the accounting side, controller, and somebody who's an expert on the budgeting, forecasting, and cash flow, tracking on the right side. You could have put two people into that one role for the same money. And
Right.
you could either say, look, I dictate, you have to be here a couple days a week. Okay, that can be worked out. Now you've hit the balance of these people don't want to be in your office 40 hours a week. Okay. But they don't have to be because you gave them tasks that could do it for a couple of days and they can get their work done and you actually get what you want. So that's where, again, balance became sort of my word. I'm seeing where I can apply balance in multiple situations.
Yeah, and here's another place where you might be able to apply that. This is actually a situation I'm dealing with. So I was brought in by a client, small operation. They've been probably in business for a couple years. They're just kind of getting their feet off the ground. Budgets are still tight. It's tough to hire somebody full time, especially on an administrative role. Um, but one of the key areas they needed help with was sales. So I'm stepping in. I'm building their sales process for them, with the idea that after a couple months, after I've pretty much laid out the processes, we would then hire somebody into that position. And that person could be hired at either a higher commission rate or whatever it might be to offset some of the costs that they would incur. But we had to start somewhere. Now, in this case, they didn't have any of the internal knowledge to put that together, or they didn't have the time to put that together either. So having a fractional person come in can kind of help lay out what you need and who you need. Because I think, to your point, when somebody says, well, I need a CFO, and you look at it and go, well, do you really, or no, you don't? I think it's because they don't understand what they need. They don't know what they need because they don't have that level of expertise. And it's almost helpful sometimes to have a fractional person come in and say, okay, you know what? This is going to be a very short term project, but let's lay out what exactly you do need help with. Now, in your case, financial, like you said, maybe they need a controller, or they need people in accounts receivable, accounts payable, again, sales, or something there that helps offset some of that. And then it's setting up those systems in place. So that way you can say, okay, now you need to hire A, B, and C to fill these positions. You can get them at these salaries, which again, for what you would be paying somebody at a executive level, is a fraction of the cost, and they're actually going to get the work done. Where that fractional person's more, again, a strategic role, not
Right.
an actionable role or a doing role.
Mhm. I think, yeah, I think it could be both.
Hmm.
I think it can be where there's a lot of people out there willing to be fractional, willing to share their time among multiple clients, you know, and they can be the doers. Um, you know, you get into a little bit of a muddy water there, right? Because you do get into the fact of somebody who says, well, I'm fractional, but they're really a bookkeeper, or they're
Hmm.
really just a regular accountant, someone who wants to be an accountant. I don't necessarily call that fractional, because accountants have had that model for years. They just charge for the
Right.
hours they do for the clients. So, that I can't see how you can just kind of translate that to fractional, you know. I just think there becomes some confusion there, and there becomes a little bit of a muddy pond of what's actually in that water. Um,
So help me with this then. What's a clear definition of fractional in your mind?
well, I definitely agree with you on the leadership role. That it really has to be someone who can take a leadership role. I think you know it gets a little cloudy when someone says, well, I'll do your fractional FP&A, your fractional budgeting and forecasting, um, because are you just a part timer, or are you building that into I'm going to become more of a knowledge base for that company? I saw somebody said it the other day. They're a fractional company, and they said that they take the time to really understand the business, which a part-time worker is not going to do that. Part-time worker is just going to be like, okay, what do you want me to get done today? Okay, I'm done at 1 o'clock. Bye-bye. Take care. I'll see you tomorrow, or I'll see you next week, or whenever it is that they're going to come in. Um, but taking the time to understand the business so they can add value from something other than just a quick task, or doing some data entry, or that's where I sort of start seeing the line drawn between a part-timer versus a fractional. I think the fractional really has to have an ability to learn more and provide additional value by being there as a quote unquote fractional. And again, I'm not the guy that likes titles. So I'm trying to apply a title so that it becomes, a teachable moment, so that somebody will
Sure.
say, oh, I learned something there. Um, but I don't think there's a clear definition at this point, and I say that because I've been watching as every accountant under the sun now says they do fractional CFO work. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean from an accountant standpoint? Are you still the accountant, or are you now adding what additional services have you added that you weren't providing before, but now you're calling it fractional CFO? So I worry a little bit about going down this road of using the title. What I really want to define here is that fractional to me means a little more than part time. It just means that they're providing what you need by a task level basis. Um, and, it doesn't just become, well, I got this guy Monday and Tuesday. You know, it's really, you have the guy as much as you need for those hours that they've contracted for to provide you the value that you're expecting, to provide you the cash flow forecast, which happens to be one that's stuck in my brain today. So I've said it like 9 times in the last 10 minutes.
I can tell
Um,
what you've been working on over the past
yeah.
week.
So, but I think that, there's a distinction when you start to ask, I had one job where someone literally told me they needed a CFO because they, just needed a CFO. And then when you got down to the task level, I could have gotten it done by bringing in a controller
Mm.
because the 9/10 of what they needed was someone who could, file the new bank reports that they had to do for this company that had never done them before. So they didn't have the knowledge base. So the fact of the matter is, you paid for a CFO to do the controller job. And for me, that becomes a rub. That really rubs me the wrong way because I could have saved you $100 an hour, you know, for what you were looking for. You used the title and you paid more, but you got less. So, and most people don't believe it. They don't think that I'm right, but I'll educate them.
Slowly but surely. I
Slowly but
also,
surely.
yeah, I also believe that when we're looking at fractional leadership roles, as you pointed out, leadership's an important component on fractional versus, we'll say, a retained employee or something like that. Um, I also believe autonomy. Because if you think of it, if you are a CFO or a COO or a CMO, fill, take any C, fill something in there, and you're expected to do a task or do work, you should be given some freedom to use your knowledge and experience to actually advance the company forward.
Yeah.
And what I see a lot of owners do is they delegate a task, a specific task. I want you to fix this. Now, for example, the sales could be a specific task that I was delegated for my fractional role. But while I'm answering to the owner, I'm also working independently of the owner, building systems and processes, doing documentation for their standard operating procedures, actually doing outreach. So I'm actually performing sales functions on my own. I'm making decisions on my own without direct oversight of the owner. And to me, that's a huge difference because now they're utilizing the experience and the knowledge that I have to
Mhm.
apply to their work and expand their operation. That is a huge difference versus saying, okay, you're going to perform a sales function, and basically you're a retained salesperson. You're just going to plug in here. You're going to do these tasks, and you're going to sell this product. Um, Again, it also goes to that finite. So I said I was going to do this. I'm only going to do this for a couple months with the idea that in that couple months, I built the processes that we can now put somebody in there that can do that job more cost effectively. So we can still build the finances right or the benefits right for that individual, but now we can do so, and they just have to follow procedure. They have to follow steps to that lead to sales, and that's a way different function than again a fractional person would be.
Mhm.
So that's kind of where I'm seeing some of the differences, and where again as we circle back into, well, what's all this relate to balance? Well, again, you can put people in to do a task and they will do that task to the best of their ability with the resources that they have. If they don't understand the resources, haven't been provided with any training, or don't have the knowledge, they're limited in their capacity. Now you take the other end of it, which is the leadership or the executive side, and you plug that person in there. Well, their job is to again expand that knowledge for the organization and create that experience profile with their teams, so that way they can step back and allow their teams to function on their own ultimately. uh, it should be our job as leaders to work ourselves out of work. That's kind of how I
Yeah.
see it, is we should be creating something that eventually replaces us. Now that replacement either moves us into another role or responsibility, especially if you're in the organization. You should always have somebody that could eventually take over your spot, so that way you can advance in the organization. Somebody's ready to fill in for you.
Yeah.
From a fractional side, I think it's really, again, bringing in that external knowledge, sharing it with the organization, implanting it in the people that work there, and then being able to either move on to another function or move on to another job altogether. So a lot different than say a full-time employee would be, and also at a fraction of the cost, because when you hire that person in full-time, you got to expect them to be busy 40 to 50 hours a week to pay for their high salary, to pay for their benefits, to pay for any other incentives that you have going on, which gets extremely expensive and really kind of curtails your ability to hire other people to fill critical roles that you might need to do as well.
Right. Do you think it would be fair, and maybe I'm limiting this too much, but do you think it'd be fair to say that the fractional has to have a relationship with the person that hired them that's more in lines with a partner as opposed to an employee?
To some degree, I think that is more accurate. I would see a fractional executive as more at a partner level than a genuine employee of the company.
Hmm.
I think it really comes down to understanding what company needs are, and
Yeah.
this is where I think most fractional positions miss out, is they don't do the research ahead of time. You were talking about the situation you were brought in to be a CFO, and in the end, you were actually a controller, and
Hmm.
they should have hired a controller. Well, what we need to be doing is we need to be going in and really, okay, get their understanding of what they think they need, and then do a quick analysis, say, yeah, this is what you need, or no, this is not what you need. You actually need this, this, and this.
Right.
And we suggest you hire these positions first, because otherwise you're going to be hiring for this position and they're going to be grossly overpaid for what they're able to do, because they're going to have to fill in a lot of those gaps that you currently have in your company.
Right. Um, yeah, I'm seeing that a little bit. I'm seeing that's also where you can get to imbalance. I was working with one company that was so focused on the end game. The
Mm.
once they got to the point of being um, at their steady state, they said they needed all of these high level people. So they had a COO, they had a CFO. Well, that was my first kind of red flag that this is not right. Because smaller companies can get away with the operations or the finance as long as somebody understands the numbers and somebody
Right.
understands the process. You can get away with one person in that double role when you're just a startup and trying to grow. But they had marketing, they had operations, they had finance, they had, I can't remember what the other ones are. By the time, oh, it was chief legal counsel.
Oh God.
So they had a GC already planned out. Like this was all planned out. And I'm like, you were 2 years old. How many practices have you bought? Because the whole point was to buy and roll up one.
So
So
that makes it really administrative top heavy, which is extremely expensive.
that's, yeah. When I figured it out, I was trying to put together a forecast to see where it was going to end up. I think it was $1 million a year of top level chief executive people. And I said, but you only have one practice under contract. You don't even have it closed yet.
Hmm.
Oh yeah, that's where we are. These are all the people that we need. I'm like, no, I can't help you, um, because that just became, this is where you're going to go if you don't think about the fractional role. This is going to be, I need that level person, so I'm going to go pay for it, but you don't have the money to pay for it, so you're doomed when you start. So it just became one of those things where the eye opener is, that if you have to hire people full time to pay for the levels of expertise that you need, um, you're going to go broke. There's not a whole lot of easier way to swallow that or say it. It's just, it's an ugly conversation that has to be had. Um,
Well, how many? You're talking about a startup here. I wonder how many startups kind of think that way. They think bigger than they are, with the intent that that must be the way you do things. You hire all these top level people, and then magically the sales will come,
Yeah.
and this cash burn will slow down because we've got all this talent at the top that can drive our revenue growth. I mean, how
You,
often does that really happen?
very rarely. I think the funny part is I had an example of that from 25 years ago. Before there was this discussion about fractional, there was a major. I had a big meeting with a startup, was probably doing 1.5 million, and the guy comes in, and we were just there as accountants at the time, and he describes this whole plan, and then in walks another guy who says he's the CFO.
Hmm.
And I'm like, at 1.5 million, how do you have a CEO, a CFO, and who else you got? Like, who else is going to pop out of that door in the next 5 minutes? And I'm going to realize that at 1.5 million, you can't pay everybody, you know? And so that was 25 years ago. So that was the mentality before there was options. So there are still some people out there who believe this is the model. Like, you still have to hire those people. The difference that I would say is, if you're going to go with that model, you need to be moving at light speed. Like, you need to be moving really fast with a real confidence that you're going to have the revenues coming in to keep that cash flow going, you know? And I don't know that people realize that. I don't think that people understand the numbers well enough to say, I got to get more deals going faster because this isn't sustainable.
Yeah, the only way I really see that working is if you've got people on your team that are extremely well connected and also you know popular, or have not only with their connections, but they're kind of like deal makers. And thinking of, like, if you have Elon Musk on your board or somebody like that that can generate business and build those sales or build those contacts for you, that's really about the only way that even makes sense. But that's
Yeah.
still extremely expensive and extremely risky,
Well,
because how many of those people are going to put their neck out
yeah.
on a new product or service that hasn't been fully tested yet?
Well, they're not because 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 one way or the other, they're going to make sure that they get their cut.
Right.
Where's mine? The Tony Soprano. My hands out. Where's the rest of it? Well, the rest
Yep.
of it's mine. So those people are going to do that not for you. They're going to do it for themselves. So one way or the other, either they're going to build up your business and they already own a percentage of it, or they're going to look at it like, I get a piece of your business now, or I'm going to be the investor, because that's another area that people kind of forget. If you're starting a business and the first thing you're doing is raising money, you know, it's pretty early and you're giving away a significant portion of your valuation, you know, to to bring in the money to keep the doors open. But what you should be doing is building the business, finding a way to build the business, not finding a way to get a capital raise.
Yep.
Because most people raise their first round of capital and then immediately start working on their second round of capital. So they never build the business.
Yes. No proof of concept, just proof of idea.
Just proof of ideas. Somebody liked it, they put their money in. And if you make it, they make a lot of money. You make very little money. Um, so I don't like that model, as you can probably tell.
No, that's not a long term model. I think
Yeah,
that's the get rich quick schemes that are out there.
yeah. So I don't like that model. I think the goal here has to be, you build the business, and you can build the business with the fractional side of it. You can get some people in that can help you for less of a cost, and you don't have to give away all your equity and then hope down the line that you become Google, because less than 1% of all people ever became Google after showing a balance sheet and after showing a profit and loss statement with zero sales and
Hmm.
saying they were worth $80 billion. Those days are over.
Yes,
Those days are over.
that is true. So what's the moral of our story here? What's the moral of creating that balance? How do you recommend that somebody should go about that if they're concerned with needs that they have internally to grow?
Well, first off, I think you keep balance as the word that's in the forefront of your mind. Don't push it to the back and allow everything that's old to kind of come back in. I think this is the new way that things are going to get done. I think that we're going to be looking at hiring shortages, et cetera, for a while. So I think people really have to start thinking differently. If you're still going to go through, well, 20 years ago when I was in school, this is the way they taught me. Well, that's old.
Hmm.
20 years ago you might as well be a 50 or 100 years ago, because it's that different than it was 20, 25 years ago. So, go with some of the change, find a way to do things a little bit differently, try it out. Actually try it out with the understanding that you're looking for balance, and don't just go down the road of, well, I'm going to hire that guy for, a bazillion dollars in benefits and everything else, when I could have gotten three different people to do three different tasks and been a heck of a lot happier. And those people may work out to the point where you say, I'm going to hire them because they can do all this work, or they can show you what they can do. So I just think there's a new way to look at things, and that's why I think balance is a good word.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I also agree that uh, using fractional help gives you a chance to try before you buy or get systems in place that normally would take much longer to do, because again you have people that don't have that level of experience to do it. So if you're asking I would say a more entry level person or somebody with fewer years of experience, they've got to build from scratch. Now everyone's got a learning curve. No matter what you do, you got to go in and figure out what's going on, because no two businesses are identical, and you have to figure out how things work. But it definitely takes you a lot longer when you haven't been down that road before. So that, to me, where the balance comes in is if you can get the fractional help you need to fill certain gaps in your operations or your financial that need to be addressed, that's got to be the best approach right now. Because as you point out, you can do that by hiring maybe two, three, four people for the same price as you would hire one full time person for, with salary, benefits, and incentives. And that's a huge difference. And that
Yeah,
to me is where, especially in the next year or two, this balance with fractional is going to come into key play.
I absolutely agree with that.
Hey, good, good. We're in agreement. So, anyway, if you need help with that fractional stuff, we got a way to do that for you.
Yes,
If you
sir.
reach out to us at xcxo.net, both of us are, you can contact us there. Two things are going on right now. We are currently looking to find fractional executives. So, if you see yourself as someone who's got roughly 20 years or more of experience, has been in some sort of management or leadership role, especially if you've had some where you've managed or dealt with a factory department, whatever it might be, that would be helpful. Beyond that, we're also looking for companies that are needing that fractional help. They see a gap in their experience pool. They're looking to train their people up, because that's the goal of this. We're not replacing anybody, but we're developing internal teams to eventually fill the roles that we will step out of. And the best way to do that is to contact us at xcxo.net. My email is dan at xcxo.net. Rich, yours is?
Mine is rich at xcxo.net.
Excellent. And you can reach us there. Next week, we will have a guest on. Mitch will be joining us and talking more about buying and selling businesses. So that'll be fun. Rich, as always, great discussion, and we will talk to you next week.
Sounds good. I'll talk to you next week.
Thank you.